The moment Tessa Crawford's knees hit the cold wooden floor of the Silver Spur Saloon that April morning in 1878, she knew her hands would bleed before noon. The lye soap had already eaten through what little softness remained in her palms, and the splinters from the rough pine boards embedded themselves beneath her fingernails with every scrubbing motion. But she could not stop because Mrs. Hartwell would dock her pay if a single stain remained visible when the afternoon crowd arrived. Tessa had been scrubbing floors in Leavenworth, Kansas for 3 years now, ever since her father died in a railroad accident and left her mother bedridden with grief that eventually took her life too. And at 22 years old, she had nearly forgotten what it felt like to stand upright without her spine aching, or to look at her hands without seeing the angry red cracks that webbed across her knuckles like tiny rivers of pain. The saloon smelled of stale whiskey, tobacco smoke, and something else she tried not to identify as she pushed the heavy brush across the floorboards in steady, rhythmic strokes. Her dark blonde hair, once thick and lustrous according to her mother, now hung in a limp braid down her back, and her dress, a faded gray thing that had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to distinguish from the patches, clung to her thin frame. She had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days, because Mrs. Hartwell had decided that Tessa had been too slow in finishing the upstairs rooms, and had reduced her wages accordingly, leaving her with barely enough to pay for the tiny room she rented above the general store. The front door swung open with a creak that made Tessa flinch, though she did not look up from her work. Customers were not supposed to arrive until after 2 in the afternoon, but rules in Leavenworth seemed to apply differently depending on who you were and how much money you carried. She heard the heavy footfalls of boots against the floor she had just cleaned, and her heart sank because she would have to scrub those prints away before Mrs. Hartwell saw them. "We are not open yet," Tessa said quietly, still not lifting her gaze from the floorboards. Her voice sounded hoarse even to her own ears, worn thin from lack of use since she rarely had anyone to talk to besides Mrs. Hartwell, who preferred to communicate through sharp looks and sharper words. "I can see that," a man's voice replied, deep and measured with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent considerable time in the saddle under the open sky. "I am looking for someone. Thought maybe you could help me." Tessa finally raised her head, pushing a loose strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist, since her hands were too filthy to touch her skin. The man standing near the entrance was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dark shirt and worn leather vest. His hat, a black Stetson that had seen better days, shadowed his face, but she could make out a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green, like storm clouds over prairie grass. He looked to be perhaps 28 or 30, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years spent working outdoors, and despite the dust that covered his clothes and the weariness that lined his features, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made Tessa suddenly aware of how she must look kneeling on the floor like a beggar. "I do not know many people in town," Tessa said carefully, returning her attention to the floor because looking at him made something uncomfortable twist in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to shame. "Mrs. Hartwell would be better suited to help you. Mrs. Hartwell is the reason I am here," the man said, taking another step into the saloon. "Name is Harrison Pierce. I am looking to hire some help at my ranch about 10 miles west of town. Heard she might know of someone willing to work." Tessa's hand stilled on the brush. Ranch work would be hard labor, certainly, but it could not possibly be worse than this, scrubbing floors until her fingers bled and her back screamed for mercy. But Mrs. Hartwell would never recommend her for such a position because Tessa was useful here. Cheap labor that could be bullied into working longer hours for less pay. And the moment she left, Mrs. Hartwell would have to find someone else to exploit. Mrs. Hartwell is not here right now, Tessa said, which was true enough. The older woman had left an hour ago to visit the bank and would not return until early afternoon. She should be back after lunch. Harrison Pierce was quiet for a moment, and Tessa could feel his gaze on her even though she kept her eyes fixed on the floorboards. "What happened to your hands?" he asked finally, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been concern. Tessa tucked her hands against her apron instinctively, heat flooding her cheeks. "Nothing, just work." "That does not look like nothing." He moved closer, and Tessa heard the floorboards creak under his weight. "That looks like someone is working you half to death." "I manage fine," Tessa said sharply, anger flaring in her chest because she did not need pity from a stranger, did not need anyone pointing out what she already knew, that her life had become a slow, grinding spiral downward with no end in sight. "If you want to wait for Mrs. Hartwell, you can sit at one of the tables, but please do not walk on the wet floor." She expected him to get angry at her tone, to say something cutting or simply leave, but instead, Harrison Pierce let out a long breath and lowered himself into a crouch beside her, close enough that she could smell leather and horse and clean sweat. "Look at me," he said quietly, and because there was no command in his voice, only a gentle request, Tessa found herself obeying. Up close, his eyes were even more striking, framed by dark lashes that any woman would envy, and there was a kindness in his weathered face that made Tessa's throat tighten unexpectedly. "How much is she paying you?" he asked. "That is none of your concern." "Probably not enough to keep body and soul together," Harrison continued as if she had not spoken. "And I would bet my best horse that she works you from dawn until long past dark with barely a break to eat or rest." Tessa said nothing, because what could she say that would not confirm exactly what he suspected? Her silence seemed to be answer enough, and Harrison nodded slowly as if she had just confirmed his worst fears. "I need someone to help keep house at my ranch," he said, his gaze steady on hers. "Cooking, cleaning, laundry, that sort of thing. I can pay $15 a month plus room and board. You would have your own cabin, small but clean, and you could eat whatever is in the kitchen. No one would work you past sunset, and Sundays are for rest. $15 a month." Tessa currently made $7 on a good month, and that was before Mrs. Hartwell found reasons to dock her pay. Room and board meant she would not have to worry about rent or food, which meant she could actually save money. Maybe even buy a new dress that did not have holes in the hem or a pair of boots that did not pinch her toes. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "Why would you offer that to someone you do not even know?" Tessa asked suspiciously. "You could hire anyone. Why me?" "Because you look like you need help," Harrison said simply. "And because I can tell from the way you have been working that you are thorough and do not cut corners." Those are qualities hard to find. Tessa wanted to believe him, wanted to think that maybe her luck was finally changing, but years of disappointment had taught her to be cautious. "I cannot just leave. Mrs. Hartwell depends on me." "Mrs. Hartwell depends on cheap labor she can abuse," Harrison corrected gently. "There is a difference. You do not owe her anything, especially not your health. She gave me work when no one else would. That does not give her the right to destroy you." Harrison stood, extending his hand toward her. "Come work for me. I promise you will be treated fairly and with respect. If after a month you are not happy, I will pay you what I owe and bring you back to town myself. No questions asked." Tessa stared at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong. the hand of someone who worked hard but was not afraid of hard work. She thought about the years stretching ahead of her, scrubbing floors until she was too old and broken to be of use to anyone, dying alone in a rented room with nothing to show for her life but scarred hands and a bent spine. And then she thought about what it might be like to have her own cabin, to eat regular meals, to work for someone who looked at her like she was a person instead of a tool to be used up and discarded. "I would need to get my things," Tessa said slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. Harrison's face broke into a smile that transformed his features entirely, making him look younger and impossibly handsome. "Then get your things. I will wait." Tessa scrambled to her feet, her knees protesting after so long on the hard floor, and hurried toward the back room where she kept her few belongings in a small basket. She had 2 other dresses, both as worn as the one she currently wore, a nightgown, an extra pair of stockings, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, and a small leather journal her father had given her for her 16th birthday. Everything she owned in the world fit into a single basket that she could carry in one arm. When she returned to the main room, Harrison was standing exactly where she had left him, and he looked at her basket with an expression that might have been sadness. "That is everything?" he asked quietly. Tessa nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Then let us go," Harrison said. "My horse is outside. Do you ride?" "Not really," Tessa admitted. She had been on a horse perhaps 3 times in her entire life and never for more than a few minutes. "You can ride with me then," Harrison said easily. "It is not far and the day is fine." Tessa followed him outside into the bright April morning, the sun already warm on her face despite the early hour. His horse, a large bay gelding with a white blaze down its face, stood patiently tied to the hitching post, and it turned its head to watch them approach with liquid dark eyes that seemed remarkably intelligent. "This is Copper," Harrison said, running his hand down the horse's neck with obvious affection. "He is gentle as a lamb despite his size." Harrison untied the reins and then turned to Tessa, holding out his hand again. "I am going to lift you up first, all right?" Before Tessa could respond, his hands were on her waist, strong and sure, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all, settling her onto the saddle. Her heart raced at the contact, at the casual strength he displayed, and she gripped the saddle horn tightly as the ground suddenly seemed very far away. Harrison swung up behind her in one fluid motion, and suddenly he was pressed against her back, his arms coming around her to take the reins, surrounding her with his warmth and his presence. "Comfortable?" he asked, his breath stirring the loose hair near her ear. Tessa managed a nod, not trusting her voice. She had not been this close to another person in years, and certainly never to a man like Harrison Pierce, and she did not quite know what to do with the feelings that closeness stirred in her chest. Harrison clicked his tongue, and Copper moved forward at an easy walk, carrying them down the main street of Leavenworth. A few people turned to stare as they passed, and Tessa knew that by evening the entire town would be buzzing with gossip about Tessa Crawford riding off with a strange cowboy, but she found she did not care. Let them talk. For the first time in 3 years, she was leaving behind the endless scrubbing and the sharp words and the bone-deep weariness, and whatever awaited her at Harrison Pierce's ranch could not possibly be worse than what she was leaving behind. They rode in silence as the town fell away behind them, and the landscape opened up into rolling prairie dotted with spring wildflowers. The sky stretched overhead in an endless blue expanse, and the wind carried the scent of new grass and possibility. Tessa began to relax slightly, her body adjusting to the rhythm of the horse's gait and to the solid warmth of Harrison at her back. "Tell me about your ranch," Tessa said finally, needing to break the silence that had settled between them. "It is not much," Harrison said, and she could hear the fondness in his voice. "About 300 acres with good water and decent grazing. I have been building it up for the past 5 years, ever since I mustered out of the cavalry. Right now, I am running about 100 head of cattle and a dozen horses. The house is small, just 3 rooms, but it is solid and keeps out the weather. Your cabin is about 50 yards from the main house, close enough to be convenient but far enough to give you privacy. You have help. Other ranch hands, too. Jacob and Samuel. They are brothers, good men who have been with me for 2 years. They have their own cabin on the north side of the property. You will meet them at supper tonight." Tessa absorbed this information, trying to picture what her new life might look like. "What happened to your previous housekeeper?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, and Tessa wondered if she had overstepped. "I did not have one," he said finally. "I have been managing on my own, which means the house is in rather rough shape, and we have been living on beans and bacon for far too long. Jacob keeps threatening to learn to cook himself, but the one time he tried, he nearly burned down the bunkhouse." Despite herself, Tessa felt a smile tug at her lips. "I am a decent cook. My mother taught me before she died." "Then you are already worth your wages and more," Harrison said warmly. "What else did your mother teach you?" It had been so long since anyone had asked Tessa about herself, about her life before the scrubbing and the endless work, that she hardly knew where to begin. "She taught me to sew and mend, to make soap and candles, to preserve food for winter. She could make a meal out of almost nothing and make it taste like a feast. She used to say that keeping a good home was its own kind of art. She sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Tessa said softly, the old grief stirring in her chest. "She died when I was 19. Just gave up after my father was killed. I think her heart broke and never mended." "I am sorry," Harrison said, and the sincerity in his voice made Tessa's eyes sting with unexpected tears. "What about other family?" "No one. It was just the 3 of us, and then just my mother and me, and then just me." Harrison's arm tightened slightly around her, a gesture of comfort that made something warm unfold in Tessa's chest. "You are not alone anymore," he said quietly. "I know we just met, but I take care of what is mine, and if you are working for me, that means you are under my protection. No one will hurt you or take advantage of you. You have my word on that." Tessa did not know what to say to such a declaration, so she said nothing, but she leaned back slightly against Harrison's chest, allowing herself to accept the comfort he offered. They rode on through the morning, and gradually the tension that Tessa had carried in her shoulders for so long began to ease as the prairie stretched out around them in waves of green and gold. After about an hour, Harrison pointed toward a line of cottonwood trees in the distance. "That is my property line. The creek runs through there, which means we have water year-round. The house is just beyond that rise." As they drew closer, Tessa could see the buildings taking shape against the landscape. The main house was indeed small, built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch that faced east. Nearby stood a barn, several corrals, and 2 smaller cabins that must house the ranch hands and presumably herself. Everything looked neat and well-maintained, and as they rode into the yard, a dog came bounding toward them, barking enthusiastically. "That is Rusty," Harrison said with obvious affection as he brought Copper to a stop. "He thinks he is fierce, but mostly he just wants his ears scratched." Harrison dismounted first and then reached up to help Tessa down, his hands once again at her waist, strong and steady. When her feet touched the ground, her legs felt shaky from the long ride, and she swayed slightly. Harrison steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his face concerned. "Are you all right? Just not used to riding, Tessa said, embarrassed by her weakness. You did well for your first long ride, Harrison assured her. Come on, let me show you your cabin first so you can settle in. He led her toward the smaller of the two cabins, Rusty dancing around their feet and occasionally jumping up to try to lick Tessa's hand. The cabin had a single room with a small iron stove in one corner, a narrow bed against the far wall, a rough wooden table with two chairs, and a trunk for storage. A single window let in the morning light, and although the furnishings were sparse, everything was clean and in good repair. I know it is not much, Harrison said, sounding almost apologetic, but the roof does not leak, and the stove draws well. There are extra blankets in the trunk, and I will make sure you have everything you need for washing up. Tessa set her basket on the table and turned to look at him, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and offered her a lifeline when she had been drowning. It is perfect, she said honestly. More than I could have hoped for. Harrison's face relaxed into a smile. I am glad. Take some time to rest and get settled. When you are ready, come up to the main house and I will show you around. We usually eat supper around 6, so you have plenty of time. After he left, Tessa stood in the center of the small cabin and slowly turned in a circle, taking in her new home. For the first time in 3 years, she had a space that was entirely her own, a door she could close, a bed that she did not have to share, and no one demanding that she scrub floors until her hands bled. The relief was so overwhelming that she sank down onto the edge of the bed and let the tears come, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body and released years of pent-up fear and exhaustion and grief. When the tears finally subsided, Tessa felt lighter, as if crying had released some of the weight she had been carrying. She washed her face in the basin of water Harrison had left on the table, carefully unpacked her few belongings into the trunk, and changed into her least worn dress, a faded blue calico that had been her Sunday best before her father died. She wished she had a mirror to check her appearance, but it had been so long since she had cared what she looked like that the impulse surprised her. The main house was larger inside than it appeared from the outside, with a central room that served as kitchen and sitting area, a small bedroom off to one side, and a storage room on the other. As Harrison had warned, the place showed clear signs of bachelor living, with dust on every surface, dishes piled in a wash basin, and clothes draped over chairs. But the structure itself was sound, and Tessa could see the care that had gone into building it, from the fitted floorboards to the sturdy furniture that looked handmade. Harrison was at the table working on what appeared to be ranch accounts, and he looked up when Tessa knocked softly on the open door. "Come in," he said, setting down his pencil. "Feeling settled?" "Yes, thank you." Tessa stepped inside, her hands clasped in front of her. "I thought perhaps you could show me where things are and I could start getting supper ready." "You do not have to start working today," Harrison said. "You just got here. Take the afternoon to rest." But Tessa shook her head. "I would rather keep busy. It will help me learn my way around." Harrison studied her for a moment and then nodded. "All right, but if you need a break, you take one. Understood?" He spent the next hour showing Tessa where everything was stored, from the root cellar where he kept potatoes and other vegetables to the smokehouse where bacon and salted beef hung from hooks. The pantry was surprisingly well stocked with flour, cornmeal, beans, and coffee, and there were chickens in a coop behind the house that provided eggs. As they walked, Harrison explained the daily routine of the ranch, when the men rose and when they took meals, what chores needed doing and when. "I do not expect you to work yourself to death," Harrison said as they returned to the main house. "This is meant to be a fair arrangement. You work hard, I pay you fairly, and we all benefit. If something is too much or you need help, you tell me. All right." Tessa nodded, still half expecting this all to be some kind of dream from which she would wake to find herself back on her knees in the Silver Spur saloon. I understand. Good. Harrison glanced at the clock on the mantel. I need to ride out and check on the herd. Jakob and Samuel should be back by 5. I will introduce you then. After he left, Tessa stood in the center of the kitchen and looked around with a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. This was work she could take pride in, work that would be appreciated rather than criticized, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. She started by heating water and washing the accumulated dishes, then scrubbed down the table and counters until they gleamed. She swept the floors, beat the dust from the rug in front of the fireplace, and organized the pantry so that she could find things easily. By the time the afternoon sun began to slant through the windows, the house looked transformed, and Tessa felt a deep satisfaction in the change. For supper, she made biscuits from scratch, fried salt pork with onions, and heated a pot of beans that she seasoned with a bit of molasses and mustard she found in the pantry. It was simple food, but it was hearty and well prepared, and the smell of baking biscuits filled the house with a warmth that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. The men arrived just as the sun was setting, their voices carrying across the yard before they appeared. Harrison entered first, followed by 2 younger men who looked so much alike they had to be the brothers he had mentioned. Both had sandy brown hair and sunburned faces, and they stopped short when they saw Tessa, their eyes widening in surprise. "Jakob, Samuel, this is Miss Tessa Crawford," Harrison said. "She is going to be keeping house for us. Miss Crawford, these are the brothers I mentioned." "Pleased to meet you, madam," Jakob said, the taller of the 2. He looked to be about 25, with a gap-toothed smile that seemed genuinely friendly. "It sure is nice to have a lady around the place." "About time, too," Samuel added. He was perhaps a year younger than his brother, stockier and with a more serious expression. "We have been living like heathens for too long." "Well, you can stop living like heathens starting tonight," Tessa said, finding herself smiling despite her nervousness. "Supper is ready if you want to wash up." The meal was a revelation for all of them. The men ate as if they had not seen real food in months, praising everything from the biscuits to the beans, and Tessa felt herself relaxing as the conversation flowed around her. They talked about the ranch, about the cattle that would need branding soon, about a fence that needed mending in the north pasture. Harrison asked her opinion on what supplies might be needed from town, and when she mentioned that the pantry could use more dried fruit and perhaps some spices, he immediately made a note to pick those items up on his next trip to Leavenworth. After supper, Jakob and Samuel excused themselves to their own cabin, and Harrison insisted on helping Tessa with the dishes despite her protests that it was her job. "Your hands are already raw enough," he said firmly, taking the dish rag from her. "You wash, I will dry. Tomorrow you can do it all yourself if you insist, but tonight you let me help." They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Tessa found herself acutely aware of Harrison's presence beside her, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed against hers in the small space, the low sound of his humming as he dried each plate. There was an intimacy to the moment that made her heart beat faster, and she had to remind herself that this was simply her employer being kind, nothing more. "Thank you for today," Tessa said quietly as they finished the last of the dishes. "For everything. You did not have to be so generous, but you were, and I will not forget it." Harrison turned to look at her, his gray-green eyes serious. "I meant what I said this morning. You are under my protection now, and I take that responsibility seriously. But beyond that, I want you to know that I see you working yourself half to death in that saloon was wrong. No one should have to live like that, scrubbing floors until their hands bleed just to survive. That is just the way life is for some of us, Tessa said, looking down at her hands. Even after just half a day of lighter work, they still looked terrible, red and cracked and scarred. It does not have to be. Harrison reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took one of her hands in his. His touch was gentle as he turned her hand over, examining the damage with a frown. These will heal now that you are not constantly working them raw. I have some salve in the cabinet that should help. Let me get it for you. He released her hand and crossed to a cabinet near the door, returning with a small tin that he pressed into her palm. Use this every night before bed. It will help with the cracking. Tessa looked up at him, at this man who had appeared in her life like something out of a dream and turned everything upside down in the space of a single day. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since that morning finally spilling out. "You do not know me. I could be lazy or a terrible cook or a thief for all you know." Harrison smiled, a slow, warm expression that made Tessa's breath catch. "I am a decent judge of character, and I know you are none of those things. As for why I am being kind, well, maybe it is because kindness costs nothing and can mean everything. Or maybe it is because when I saw you on your knees in that saloon with your hands bleeding and your spirit nearly broken, I saw someone who deserved better and I had the means to provide it. Does there need to be more reason than that?" Tessa felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Most people would not even notice, let alone care." "Then most people are fools," Harrison said simply. "Now you should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a full day, and I want you to start it properly rested for once." Tessa made her way back to her cabin in the gathering darkness, Rusty trotting alongside her like a self-appointed guardian. Inside, she lit the lamp and sat on the edge of her bed, carefully applying the salve to her hands as Harrison had instructed. The ointment was cool and soothing, and as she worked it into her damaged skin, she thought about everything that had changed in the course of a single day. This morning, she had been on her knees scrubbing floors with no hope for anything better. Tonight, she was sitting in her own cabin on a ranch owned by a man who treated her with more respect and kindness than anyone had in years. It seemed impossible, like something from one of the romantic stories her mother used to read aloud on winter evenings, and yet it was real. As Tessa lay down in her narrow bed and pulled the blankets up to her chin, she allowed herself to think about Harrison Pierce, about his storm cloud eyes and his gentle hands, and the way he had looked at her like she mattered. It was dangerous to think such thoughts about her employer, she knew, dangerous to let herself feel anything beyond gratitude and respect. But as sleep claimed her, Tessa could not quite stop herself from wondering what it might be like if a man like Harrison Pierce could ever see her as something more than just a housekeeper he had rescued from a hard life. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Tessa rose with the sun and had breakfast ready by the time the men came in from the morning chores. After they left for their work, she spent the day cleaning, cooking, mending, and doing the 100 other tasks that kept a household running smoothly. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way that scrubbing saloon floors had never been, and more importantly, it was appreciated. Harrison made a point of thanking her for every meal, and Jacob and Samuel were effusive in their praise of her cooking and the improved state of the house. Her hands began to heal as Harrison had promised they would, the angry red cracks fading to pink scars and then to nearly normal skin. She put on a little weight from regular meals, and the permanent exhaustion that had dogged her steps for years began to lift. But it was Harrison who occupied more and more of her thoughts as the weeks passed. She learned that he had served in the cavalry for 6 years before mustering out to start his ranch, that he had been born in Missouri, but had no family left there, that he loved horses almost as much as he loved the land. He had a quiet sense of humor that emerged at unexpected moments, and he was unfailingly patient and kind not just to her, but to everyone he encountered. Tessa caught herself watching for him during the day, listening for the sound of his voice or his footsteps on the porch. When he came in for meals, she found herself paying attention to what he liked and disliked, adjusting her cooking to suit his preferences. She made his favorite dried apple pie and felt absurdly pleased when he asked for a second slice. She mended his shirts with smaller, neater stitches than strictly necessary, taking pride in making them look as good as new. It was dangerous, this growing attachment, but Tessa seemed powerless to stop it. Harrison was everything she had never known she wanted in a man. Strong but gentle, confident but not arrogant, hardworking but not harsh. And sometimes, when she caught him looking at her across the supper table, or when his hand brushed against hers as he passed her a dish, she thought she saw something in his eyes that mirrored her own confused feelings. One evening in early June, about 6 weeks after Tessa had come to the ranch, Harrison asked her to take a walk with him after supper. Jacob and Samuel had already retreated to their cabin, and the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold across the western sky. Tessa's heart hammered as she walked beside Harrison toward the creek, wondering what he wanted to discuss and half afraid it would be bad news. They walked in silence until they reached the creek bank, where the cottonwood trees provided dappled shade and the water burbled over smooth stones. Harrison stopped and turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want to talk to you about something," he said, and Tessa's stomach dropped because this was surely where he told her that he no longer needed her services, or that she had done something wrong. "All right," she managed, clasping her hands together to keep them from shaking. Harrison took a deep breath, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. "These past weeks having you here have been good, more than good. The house feels like a home now instead of just a place to sleep between work. The meals are wonderful, everything runs smoothly, and Jacob and Samuel are happier than I have ever seen them. You have exceeded every expectation I had." "Thank you," Tessa said softly, wondering where this was leading. "But the thing is," Harrison continued, his gaze holding hers, "somewhere along the way, this stopped being just about having a housekeeper. When I see you in the kitchen in the morning, or when you smile at something Jacob says, or when you are hanging laundry and the wind catches your hair, I find myself thinking thoughts that an employer has no business thinking about someone who works for him." Tessa's breath caught in her throat. "What kind of thoughts?" "The kind where I imagine that you are here not because I am paying you, but because you want to be here. The kind where I think about what it would be like to come home to you every evening not as my housekeeper, but as something more. The kind where I see a future that includes you in every part of it." Harrison ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated with himself. "I know it is too soon, and I know I am probably completely out of line, but I have to ask. Is there any chance, any possibility that you might feel something similar?" Tessa stared at him, her mind reeling. Harrison Pierce, this good, kind, strong man who had rescued her from a life of drudgery and treated her with more respect than anyone ever had, was standing here telling her that he had feelings for her. It seemed impossible, like something that happened in stories but never in real life, and yet the hope in his eyes was absolutely real. "I feel it too," Tessa heard herself say, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I've been trying not to because you are my employer and I did not want to make things awkward, but yes, I think about you all the time. I watch for you during the day and I find excuses to spend more time in the house when you are there. And when you smile at me, it makes my whole day better. I do not know exactly what this is, but I know it feels important. Harrison's face broke into a smile so bright it took Tessa's breath away. Can I court you properly? He asked. I know the situation is unusual, but I want to do this right. I want to take you on rides, bring you flowers, sit with you in the evening, all the things a man does when he is trying to win a woman's heart. And I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated because I am paying your wages. If you need time, or if you would rather I keep my distance, you say so and I will respect that completely. I do not need time, Tessa said, her heart feeling like it might burst from happiness. I would like you to court me. I would like that very much. Harrison closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and took her hands in his, careful of her still healing palms. Your hands are looking better, he said softly, running his thumbs across her knuckles. They are the hands of someone who works hard, but not someone who is being worked to death. I am glad. So am I, Tessa whispered. Harrison, when you walked into that saloon and saw me on the floor, you saved my life. You know that, do you not? I was disappearing a little more every day, and I do not know how much longer I could have lasted. Harrison's expression turned fierce. You were never going back there. Even if you decide tomorrow that you want nothing to do with me romantically, you are still not going back to scrubbing floors for that woman. The only floor you scrub now is your own home, whether that is the cabin you are in now or somewhere else entirely. Do you understand me? The words hit Tessa with unexpected force and she felt tears spring to her eyes. My own home, she repeated softly. I like the sound of that. So do I, Harrison said, and then, moving slowly to give her time to pull away, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and respectful, but it sent warmth flooding through Tessa's entire body, and when he pulled back, she saw the same warmth reflected in his eyes. They walked back to the ranch hand in hand as the stars began to appear overhead, and when Harrison left her at her cabin door, Tessa felt like she was floating. Inside, she sat on her bed and touched her fingers to her forehead where his lips had been, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in just 6 weeks. The courting that followed was everything Tessa had never known she wanted. Harrison took her on rides through the prairie, showing her the boundaries of his land and the places he loved best. He brought her wildflowers that he left on her cabin doorstep in the morning, bright splashes of color that made her smile every time she saw them. In the evenings after supper, they sat on the porch together and talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. Harrison told her about his time in the cavalry, about the battles he had fought and the places he had seen. He spoke of friends he had lost and the reasons he had chosen to leave the military life behind. I wanted to build something, he said one evening as they watched the sunset. I wanted to have land of my own and a home that would last. I wanted to create something good and lasting in a world that can be hard and cruel. Tessa told him about her parents, about her father's laughter and her mother's gentle wisdom. She spoke about the years after they died, about the slow descent into poverty and desperation, about the day she had realized she was trapped with no way out. I had given up, she admitted quietly. I thought that was just my life now, and it would be that way until I died. I did not believe things could get better. They can always get better, Harrison said, taking her hand. Sometimes you just need someone to give you a chance. As the summer deepened and the relationship between them grew stronger, Tessa began to truly believe in the possibility of happiness. She laughed more than she had in years, smiled so often her cheeks hurt, and found herself looking forward to each new day with an excitement she had thought lost forever. Harrison was attentive and affectionate without being overbearing, always respectful of her boundaries while making it clear that his feelings for her were deepening steadily. Jakob and Samuel watched this development with obvious approval, often finding excuses to leave the couple alone together or making themselves scarce after supper. One afternoon, Jakob pulled Tessa aside while she was gathering eggs from the chicken coop. "Miss Crawford, can I say something that might be overstepping?" he asked, looking slightly nervous. "Of course," Tessa said, setting down her basket. "We have known Harrison for a couple of years now, Samuel and me, and in all that time we have never seen him like this. Happy, I mean. Really happy. He was always a good boss and a decent man, but there was something missing, like he was building this ranch but did not quite know why. Since you came, that has changed. He has purpose now beyond just the work. He has something to build toward. I just wanted to say that we are glad you are here and we hope you stick around." Tessa felt her eyes sting with tears. "I plan to," she said softly, "if Harrison wants me to." "Oh, he wants you to," Jakob said with a grin. "Trust me on that." In late July, Harrison made a trip to Leavenworth to pick up supplies and deal with some business at the bank. He asked Tessa if she wanted to come along, but she declined, not quite ready to face the town where she had spent those miserable years. When he returned in the late afternoon, he sought her out in the garden where she was pulling weeds from the vegetable patch. "I have something for you," he said, dismounting from Copper with a package wrapped in brown paper under his arm. Tessa stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "You did not need to bring me anything." "I wanted to," Harrison said, handing her the package. "Open it." Inside was the most beautiful dress Tessa had ever seen, a deep blue cotton with tiny white flowers embroidered along the collar and cuffs. There was also a new pair of boots, soft brown leather that looked like they would actually fit properly, and a matching blue ribbon for her hair. "Harrison, this is too much," Tessa protested, even as her fingers caressed the soft fabric of the dress. "You already pay me wages. You do not need to buy me gifts." "I wanted to," Harrison repeated. "You have been wearing the same 3 dresses since you got here, and while there is nothing wrong with them, I wanted you to have something new, something that is just yours that no one else has ever worn." "You deserve nice things, Tessa." Tessa looked up at him, this man who seemed determined to show her that she had value, that she deserved kindness and consideration and beautiful things. "Thank you," she whispered. "I love it." "There is something else," Harrison said, suddenly looking nervous. "I ran into Mrs. Hartwell in town. She wanted me to tell you that you left without giving notice, and she expects compensation for the inconvenience." Tessa felt ice flood her veins. "What did you say?" "I told her that you did not owe her a damned thing considering the way she worked you half to death for starvation wages," Harrison said, his voice hard. "I also told her that if she comes anywhere near you or tries to make trouble, she will have to answer to me." She was not pleased, but she backed down quickly enough when I made it clear I was serious. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Harrison said firmly. "You are under my protection, remember. That means I do not let anyone hurt you or threaten you, not even from a distance. Mrs. Hartwell can find some other poor soul to exploit. She is not getting you back." Tessa felt something break open in her chest, some last piece of fear and doubt that had been hiding there since the day she left the saloon. Harrison meant what he said. He was truly protecting her, standing between her and the life that had nearly destroyed her. And more than that, he was giving her a future, a chance at happiness she had never thought possible. "I love you," Tessa said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know it has only been a couple of months and maybe it is too soon, but I do. I love you, Harrison Pierce." Harrison's eyes widened, and then his face broke into that brilliant smile that never failed to make her heart race. "It is not too soon," he said, pulling her into his arms. "And I love you too. I have loved you since the day I saw you on that floor, and you looked up at me with so much dignity despite everything. I loved your strength and your courage and your refusal to complain even though you had every right to. I loved the way you smiled when you saw your cabin for the first time like I had given you a palace instead of a tiny room. I love everything about you, Tessa Crawford, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." And then he was kissing her properly for the first time. Not the chaste peck on the forehead from weeks ago, but a real kiss that made her head spin and her knees weak. His arms were strong around her, holding her close, and Tessa wrapped her own arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up feeling of the past months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know we have not been courting long, but I know what I want and I want you. Be my wife, Tessa. Make this ranch our home together, not just yours or mine, but ours. Let me take care of you for the rest of our lives." Tessa's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said, laughing through the tears that streamed down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." Harrison let out a whoop of joy that startled the chickens and brought Jacob and Samuel running from the barn to see what the commotion was about. When they saw Harrison and Tessa standing in the garden with their arms around each other, both grinning like fools, Jacob let out his own shout of approval. "About time," he called. "We were wondering how long you two were going to dance around each other." The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Leavenworth. It was a simple ceremony with only a handful of guests, including Jacob and Samuel, the town doctor who had treated Harrison for a broken arm the previous winter, and the minister's wife who had never met Tessa before, but insisted on making her a small bouquet of late summer flowers. Tessa wore her new blue dress with her hair pinned up and the matching ribbon woven through it, and when she saw Harrison waiting for her at the altar in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his eyes bright with emotion, she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her with such tenderness that Tessa felt tears slip down her cheeks. This was real. This was her life now. She was married to a good man who loved her, who saw her as an equal partner rather than someone to be used, and she was going home to a ranch that would be hers as much as his. The celebration afterward was small but joyful. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant, and Jacob insisted on making a toast that went on far too long and made everyone laugh. Samuel gave them a handmade wooden box he had carved himself as a wedding gift, and the doctor's wife pressed a small package of herb seeds into Tessa's hand, for starting your own garden as a married woman. As the sun began to set, Harrison and Tessa rode back to the ranch together on Copper, Tessa sitting in front of her husband with his arms around her just like that first day, though everything was different now. They were not employer and housekeeper, but husband and wife, partners in building a life together. When they reached the ranch, Harrison surprised her by carrying her across the threshold of the main house, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. He set her down gently in the center of the room, and Tessa looked around at the space that was now truly her home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Pierce," Harrison said softly, taking her hands in his. "I like the sound of that," Tessa said, smiling up at him. "Mrs. Pierce, it has a nice ring to it." "It suits you," Harrison said, and then he was kissing her again, and Tessa stopped thinking about names or rings or anything else, except the feeling of being held by the man she loved. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, with Harrison showing infinite patience as he helped Tessa overcome her nervousness. He was gentle and attentive, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and when Tessa finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt a contentment so deep it seemed to reach into her very bones. The months that followed were the happiest of Tessa's life. She and Harrison settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. She continued to manage the household, but now it was truly her domain, and Harrison consulted her on every decision from what cattle to buy to how they should expand the ranch. He had meant what he said about her being an equal partner, and he valued her opinions and insights. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. The cattle herd grew, and they added more horses, including a gentle mare that Harrison gave to Tessa so she could learn to ride properly. She named the mare Daisy and spent hours in the saddle, gradually becoming confident enough to ride out to check fences or move cattle alongside the men. Jacob and Samuel became like brothers to Tessa, teasing her good-naturedly and coming to her for advice when they had problems. Samuel even started courting a young woman from town, and Tessa helped him write letters to her since his spelling was shaky at best. As autumn turned to winter, Tessa realized she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Harrison, choosing a quiet evening when they were sitting by the fire after supper. When she placed his hand on her still flat stomach and told him he was going to be a father, Harrison's face went through a rapid series of expressions, from shock to joy to fierce protectiveness. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Are you all right?" "Do you need to see the doctor?" "I am sure, and I am fine," Tessa said, laughing at his sudden anxiety. "Women have babies all the time, Harrison. I am healthy and strong, and I have you to take care of me. Everything will be all right." "I am going to be a father," Harrison said wonderingly, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly Tessa could barely breathe. "We are going to have a family." "We already are a family," Tessa pointed out. "This is just adding to it." Harrison insisted on doing everything he could to make things easier for Tessa during her pregnancy. He hired a woman from town to come help with the heavier housework, refused to let Tessa lift anything heavy, and fussed over her until she had to gently remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass. But his concern came from love, and Tessa found she did not mind the extra attention even when it was excessive. The winter passed slowly, and as spring returned to the prairie, Tessa grew round with their child. Harrison would often place his hand on her belly to feel the baby kick. His face transformed with wonder each time. In late April, nearly a year after Harrison had first walked into the Silver Spur Saloon and changed Tessa's life forever, she went into labor. It was a long, difficult process that left Harrison pacing the floor and Jacob and Samuel hiding out in the barn to avoid witnessing the birth. But when the midwife finally placed a squalling, red-faced infant in Tessa's arms, every moment of pain was forgotten in the rush of love she felt for this tiny person she and Harrison had created together. "It is a boy," the midwife announced with satisfaction. "A big, healthy boy with a good set of lungs on him." Harrison approached the bed with something like awe on his face, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand with one large, calloused finger. The infant immediately grabbed onto him, his grip surprisingly strong, and Harrison let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "He is perfect," Harrison whispered. "Tessa, he is absolutely perfect." "He looks like you," Tessa said, already able to see Harrison's features in the baby's face. "Same nose, same chin." "Poor kid," Harrison joked weakly, unable to tear his gaze from his son. They named him Henry Thomas Pierce, after both of their fathers, and from the moment he entered the world, Henry became the center of their universe. He was a demanding baby, always hungry and rarely content to sleep for more than a few hours at a time, but neither Tessa nor Harrison minded. Jacob and Samuel proved to be devoted uncles, taking turns holding Henry and entertaining him with silly faces, and Rusty appointed himself the baby's guardian, lying protectively beside the cradle whenever Henry slept. As Henry grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. They added a proper second bedroom to the main house for the child and expanded the barn to accommodate more horses. Jacob married Samuel's sweetheart sister, and Samuel eventually married his own love, and both couples built their own small houses on the ranch property. The Pierce Ranch became a true community, with several families working together to build something lasting and good. When Henry was 3 years old, Tessa gave birth to twin girls, Anna and Rose, who were as different as night and day despite being identical in appearance. Anna was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit with a doll or help her mother in the kitchen, while Rose was wild and fearless, always climbing trees or chasing after her father and the ranch hands. Harrison doted on all 3 children equally, but Tessa sometimes caught him watching the girls with an expression of such tender protectiveness it made her heart ache. The years rolled by in a blur of busy, happy days. Henry grew tall and strong, learning to ride and rope and manage cattle under his father's patient instruction. The twins kept Tessa constantly on her toes with their energy and mischief. The ranch expanded to over 1,000 acres, and the Pierce name became known throughout the territory as synonymous with quality horses and fair dealing. Through it all, Tessa never forgot where she had come from or how close she had come to losing herself entirely. Sometimes, when she was kneading bread or hanging laundry or any of the 100 other tasks that filled her days, she would pause and look at her hands. They were still work-worn and calloused, but they were healthy hands, strong hands, the hands of a woman who worked hard but was valued and respected and loved. The angry scars from her time scrubbing floors in the saloon had faded to nearly nothing, visible only if you knew to look for them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Tessa back to the spot by the creek where he had first told her he loved her. The cottonwood trees had grown taller, and the creek ran just as clear as it had that summer evening when everything had changed. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked as they sat side by side on the bank, their hands intertwined. "Leaving town and coming here, marrying me." Tessa turned to look at him, this man who had been her savior and her partner and the love of her life. He was older now, with threads of silver in his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "You gave me my life back, Harrison. More than that, you gave me a life I never even knew was possible. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You valued me when I had nothing to offer. You loved me when I could not even love myself. How could I ever regret that?" "I was the lucky one," Harrison said, raising her hand to his lips. "You brought light and warmth and meaning to everything I had built. You made this ranch a home and gave me a family and a reason to wake up grateful every morning. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Tessa Pierce, and I thank God every day for the impulse that made me walk into that saloon." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built together, and Tessa thought about the woman she had been 10 years ago, broken and desperate, and convinced that her life would never be anything more than endless scrubbing and pain. That woman would never have believed that such happiness was possible, that a man like Harrison Pierce could exist, that she deserved to be loved and cherished and valued. But she knew better now. She knew that sometimes when you were at your lowest point, life could surprise you. Sometimes a stranger could walk through a door and see you, really see you, and offer you a chance at something better. Sometimes the hands that were raw from scrubbing floors could heal and become the hands that built a home and a family and a life worth living. "The only floor you scrub now is your own home," Harrison had said to her that first day, and he had kept that promise. This ranch, this house, this life, it was all truly hers as much as his. She was not a servant or an employee, but a partner, an equal, a wife and mother and woman of worth. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, with the lights glowing warmly in the windows and the sound of their children's laughter drifting across the yard, Tessa felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path her life had taken. It had not been easy, and there had been moments of struggle and pain, but those hard times had led her here, to this place, to this man, to this beautiful, messy, perfect life. Henry met them at the door, now 13 years old and nearly as tall as his father, with news about a new foal that had been born in the barn. The twins came running, both talking at once about something that had happened that day, their voices overlapping in a cheerful cacophony. Harrison scooped Rose up in one arm and ruffled Anna's hair with his free hand, while listening patiently to Henry's excited report. Tessa stood in the doorway and watched her family, this miracle that had grown from a single act of kindness on a spring morning 10 years ago. She thought about the woman she had been and the woman she had become, about raw hands and healed hearts, about floors scrubbed in desperation and homes built with love. And she smiled, because this was her life now. This was her home. And she would spend every day for the rest of her years being grateful for the cowboy who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself, who had lifted her up and given her a chance to discover who she was meant to be. The only floor she scrubbed now was her own, and that made all the difference in the world.